Oh, you're hip.
Yes, I don't know.
How come?
I don't know. I was tooling around your
It's an age.
Get done when you come over to my yard.
Yeah. It's an age and wisdom thing, you know. She should be old enough to know better.
Old enough to know better.
Oh, yeah. So now I can't have you read for me. Huh? All right, I guess the bell rang, so we'll get started here. We're going to finish up Obadiah tonight, and then next week, Jason's not here. Jason's going to pick up, and he's going to start teaching. I don't know what he's going to start with next week, to give you a heads up there, but I think all you know that this quarter we split up.
You got it next week?
Jason does, yeah. And then Randy's going to finish up. I think he's going to top everything off at the end. So let's start with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we want to thank you so much for this opportunity to come together with our family here to spend some time in your word. And Father, as we take a look at the Old Testament and as we take a look at Obadiah, Father, help us glean the kind of things that we need to know to properly control our lives. And it's easy to see sometimes, what your people did that were wrong in the past and the things that they did that were right. But Father, it's so easy for us to kind of set those things aside and not think about how important that is. So Father, we pray that as we study this evening, that you help us to really see how we need to be thinking and living our lives to be truly called your children. Father, we pray for all those that couldn't be with us this evening, those that are sick and that are in the process of healing. We want to pray for all of them, and we want to thank you for all of the answered prayers. We know that if we lift them up to you, that you always send the answers down. And Father, just be with all of us as we face such times in this world today. Father, thank you so much for your Son. Thank you for his example. And it's in his blessed name that we pray. Amen. All right. What we're going to do is we're going to finish up reading the chapter and talk about that. And then we're going to kind of come back and do a quick recap through everything and spend a little bit more time on a couple of points. So I think, if I remember right, it was only last week. You'd think I'd remember. I think we left off in 15 or 16, I think. I think so. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll read this, and we're going to read all the way through, I think, to the end of the chapter. Starting in Obadiah, verses 15. The day of the Lord is near for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. Just as you drank on my holy hill, so all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and be as if they had never been. But on Mount Zion will be deliverance. It will be holy, and the house of Jacob will possess its inheritance. The house of Jacob will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. The house of Esau will be the stubble, and they will be set on fire and consume it. There will be no survivors from the house of Esau, the Lord has spoken. People from Negev will occupy the mountains of Esau, and the people from the foothills will possess the land of the Philistines. They will occupy the fields of Ephraim, and Samaria and Benjamin will possess Gilead. This company of Israelites, exiles who are in Canaan, will possess the land as far as the Zarephath. The exiles from Jerusalem who are in Sepharad will possess the towns of the Negev. Deliverers will go up on Mount Zion to govern the mountains of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's. So what's the final words he's giving us there?
Well, whatever you do is going to turn around and come back.
Yeah. Whatever they have done, it's going to turn around and come back on them. And we're going to talk about some things that aren't in here, but when we look at, the destruction of Edom, we're going to see some of that. What else? Pretty completely, huh? Yeah, there's going to be none left. We're going to take a look at that as well. What do you think he means when he talks about in verse 16? He says, just as you drank on my holy hill, so all nations will drink continually. They will drink and be as if they had never been. Which holy hill is he talking about? Okay.
People. So as you consume my people, essentially talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, if you didn't hear that, is he's talking about, the holy hill is Mount Zion, and just as you drank on my holy hills, so all the nations will drink continuously. That's, the consummation of God's people. But then in verse 17, what does he go on? And it kind of talks about it through the rest of it. That on Mount Zion will be deliverance. So he's changing his message here, isn't he? I mean, up to this point through the chapter, we've been talking about Edom, what they did wrong, what's going to happen to them, their total destruction. And now he says, on Mount Zion will be deliverance. Who's the deliverance going to be for?
It's going to be God's faithful Judah, the tribes that are faithful.
Right.
And as he goes on to talk about Joseph, that's the northern tribes, and they will be consumed. I think that's what he said.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think he's talking to the tribes, but is that anybody? If there was people from Edom or some of the other places that tried to stay with God and tried to stay holy to God, I think that applies to them as well. But really, he's talking to the nations.
Joseph, the son of Jacob, was no tribe. His sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, became the tribes, and they were large part of the northern tribes.
Right.
So that's how he's using their names of it.
Yeah, in verse 18, when he's talking about that, and they're going to be the ones that consume Esau, and we'll take a look at that at the very end. So there was two mountains, right? There was Mount Zion, and what was the other one? Mount Seir, that Edom held so close to themselves. And we already looked at that last week a little bit. We looked at some of those passages where, Mount Seir wasn't anything. It wasn't anything to God. I mean, it was to Edom, but it wasn't to them. And so when he's talking in verse 17 there about on Mount Zion will be deliverance, where was the tabernacle or the temple? It was on Mount Zion, right? That's right. God sat enthroned in his most holy place within the holy place. It was he and not the people who made Zion superior to Mount Seir. The saved assembly was going to assemble on that mountain, on Mount Zion. And Israel's, sinned because they didn't come before the Lord at Zion, right? So they made mistakes as well. So let's take a look let's turn over, before I move on, I'm going to forget that before I come back. Let's turn over to Hebrews chapter 12. And I want to read something out of Hebrews. Otherwise, I'll forget this. Come on. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 22 through 24. Let's see, Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 22. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. So God still sits on his throne, right? God still sits on his throne in the New Jerusalem, on Mount Zion, and we come to him. He's not on the high places, but on Zion. And so God attracts Christians, right? Just like he attracted them in those days. So what does that say for us today? That's so important to us, isn't it? God is still active in our lives today. We talked about last week, we talked a little bit about, we can use these kind of lessons to learn about things that Edom did, right? What it was one of the big things the first thing that God chastised them for was pride, right? And do we typically have the arrogant kind of pride that it appears Edom did? It sounds like they were pretty arrogant about, in their pride. Now, I don't know, maybe we don't struggle with that level, but pride is pride, right? Because what did we say last week that pride does to us? If we take pride in something, about ourselves, it could be financing, it could be how strong I am, how good I am, what I can do, whatever it happens to be. Pride always puts our focus on ourselves. Whenever that happens, it takes our focus, it diminishes our focus on God, right? And that's the bad part, is the reduction of our focus on God. Because more and more as time goes by, we begin to rely more and more on ourselves and less on God. And then how do you know where you're doing the right thing? Who becomes your rule book then? It isn't the Bible, right? I start playing by my own rule book then, because my focus is on myself regardless of what it is. So that's a really important lesson for us. And I think pride is one of those things that, we talked about last week, should we even use the word, can we be proud of things? I can be proud of my son, I can be proud of, whatever. And, well, that's a little bit different, right? But we got to be careful because there's a fine line when we start looking at stuff like that. So pride is something we probably should say, well, maybe shouldn't say I'm proud of somebody anymore or something anymore. I should maybe find better words to use than that, because I think it is so deceitful. It's one of those things that slide in under the door that's so easy to infiltrate stuff. That's why also when we talked about some of the things last week, that are going on in this country, how things change, and we can see that all the way through history, right? Something that, we just did a little bit before, and as years go by, we do it more and more and more and more, and all of a sudden someday there's nothing wrong with doing it at all, right? And because things like that just tend to grow. And what happens when we take our focus off of God, then we don't see those changes. That's why it's so important, I think, that we continuously think about that. Okay, let's see, what else did it say? And then in the last few verses there, what he's talking about, this is the part we just talked about. The house of Jacob shall consume the house of Esau. And we read those verses 17 and 18. Again, Judah's people, were they any better than Edom's? Maybe not, They certainly had a lot of problems, but it was the fact that Jehovah sat on Zion and not Seir. And Judah they were better than Edom, without a doubt. But they had their own problems as well.
If God could judge Israel, he could judge the north and the south of Israel, but Edom was not going to judge him. And Edom was arrogant in that sense.
Right.
And so God put an end to Edom because they were treating his people with arrogance and pride and the way they shouldn't. And so
Right.
God let them know in a heartless way that he would not tolerate that. And the interesting thing, we're talking about two brothers here, Jacob and Esau.
Right.
And the nation would come out of it. And we can see the prophecy, the younger versus the older, etc.
Right. Okay, and then in the last couple of verses of that chat, better watch the time. Yeah, Mike.
Struggling with the thought, chapter verse 18 there, maybe somebody can help me with it. It says, there will be no survivors from the house of Esau, the Lord has spoken. If I understand right, Herod was an Edomite.
Right.
And he ruled at the time Jesus was there. So how could there be no survivors? How do we sort that out?
I think, Mike, it depends what you call surviving. And if you look at Esau and Edom, they really didn't survive. There may have been, it's like Israel met its end 70 AD when the Roman army came in and wiped them out. God judged them. But, as you and I well know, there are a lot of Jews still living.
Okay, so individuals, if this is a nation, yeah, okay. Thank you.
I had one more thought written down here, but I guess I took it off this one that I printed out. But yeah, you're right. Herod, because Herod was a descendant, and his family. Okay, so let's take a look at the last couple of verses there. Let's see. We read through all of those, starting in verses 19. The children of Israel will possess Edom and the surrounding nations in the prophecy to Obadiah, and talks about that in verses 19 through 20. The ultimate rule will be that of the Lord's, right? That says that in verses 21. Deliverers will ascend Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's. And so we see, and we talked about that a little bit last week also, was even though a lot of this was, judgment against Edom, Obadiah still provided hope for some of those that had a place and a deliverance to Mount Zion. So we saw that at the end. So if we kind of go back, what I want to do is spend, I don't know that I have enough to go through the whole night tonight, but I want to go through kind of a recap and then talk about the actual fulfillment a little bit and look at some of those dates. Yeah, Randy?
Yeah, I just want to make one small interjection about the topic that Mike was bringing up there, because Eric was a Nabatean, and the Nabateans occupied the area that Edom had previously occupied, but the origin of the Nabateans is they were Arab tribes from further south down the Gulf, and they supplanted the Edomites and took that over. And the reason that Herod was there in the first place as king of the Jews is because during the time of the Maccabees, Judahites went and conquered Edom completely and brought it into subjection and forced everybody to convert to Judaism by the sword. All right? So that's how Herod came to be a Jew, even though he wasn't of the Jewish nation. All right? So I mean, in a sense, the nation of Edom disappeared once the Nabateans came in and took that all over. And one of those Indiana Jones movies where they go to Petra. I don't know if you've seen that. So Petra was the capital of the Nabatean Empire that existed there in the place of the Edomites.
Right. Yeah, so let's talk about that just a little bit. It doesn't matter which we do first here. So when did Edom's destruction begin? And who was that? That was the Babylonian Empire. That was a number of years after the time we're talking about here, right? So Edom's destruction really began with the Babylonian invasion with Nebuchadnezzar. And so that was the first one, right? But that didn't complete everything. And then that was about in 600 BC, roughly. And then it continued into the 4th century BC with the invasion that you're talking about of the Arabs, the Nabateans, and that forced them to the region south of Judah, just like you said. Let's see. Okay, and then, so that was, when was that? That was about the 4th century. And then in the 2nd century BC, then the Maccabees brought them under subjection when Judas Maccabeus slew 20,000 of them, right? And so that's the history with that. And John, so that was about the 2nd century. And then John Hyrcanus in 134 to 104 BC forced the remnant to accept circumcision in the law. And so that was pretty much the conclusion of that nation. And then we'll talk a little bit about the ultimate fulfillment when Christ came. We'll spend some time talking about that at the end. Okay? But I thought those were good things to touch on. Okay, let's go back. Let's see where we're at. Okay, so we talked about the pride. And we talked about how pride is, impact them, how it could impact us today. So that's a lesson for us today as well. And then we started to touch on and spend some time talking about all the other sins that Edom had, the mistreatment of their brother, right? And so we had a list of things they did, right? And, let's see, where's my list so I can go through that and don't have to spell them out individually. Here it is. Yeah, so what was one of the first things they did? you know, while Jerusalem was being invaded, what did they do? They stood by, right? The passages use the word, they were aloof, you know, indifferent, didn't care. You know, and so that was one we want to talk about a little bit, because that was something that I think can impact us as well. They rejoiced over the captivity of the sons of Judah, and they boasted about it. They actually participated in looting of Jerusalem. And then the last thing they did was they actually set up roadblocks and stopped people that were fleeing, and in some cases sold them into slavery. So when we look at some of those things, you know, I mean, that was all geared towards their brother, right? And we said, okay, for us today, you know, what's the message for us today? Who's our brother today? Is Walt my brother? Yeah. In a way, is the guy sitting down in the bar tonight my brother? Maybe not the same way Walt is, but he is. You know, I think human beings are human beings, you know, and we're here to take care of what needs to be taken care of. You know, so when we think about the word aloof, or when they said they were standing by, in this case they were standing by while something terrible was happening to their brother Judah, what is that, how does that apply to us today? Kevin?
According to this example, the family relationship that he's talking about was 1,000 years before the events he's writing about.
Right?
Go back 1,000 years in your family, pick out two of your brothers, and figure out who they are now.
Yeah.
Everybody.
That's right. That's right. Good way to say it. Better way to say it than I did. Yeah. So what's our responsibility? That's what we started talking about last week, right? What's our responsibility as Christians today?
Take care of our brother, our neighbor, everyone. We're not to be depriving anyone of the gospel, and should be trying to take it to everyone.
Okay.
That's how we express our love.
Okay. Can we all do that the same way? No. Because of physical differences, you know, all kinds of differences, right? It depends on what people's needs are, you know. I mean, sometimes there's a need. We talk about it up front here quite frequently when we have our offering, right? There's lots of different ways we can give back to God. We can give our money. Well, some people can do a lot more than others. That's just the way it is, you know. We can give back through our deeds, you know, or a helping hand. Well, some people can do some things, some people can do other things, and at some point we get pretty doggone old and it's harder to do any of that stuff anymore, at least physically, right? But we still have the wisdom. That's another gift, right? You know, so we look at all of that, and that's something I want us to think about, you know, as we go forward, is, you know, do we take advantage, and I think that's a good word to use, do we take advantage of opportunities that God gives us to help, regardless of which way, you know, or what type of help is needed at the time? Clint?
I was just going to say, good point. To me, when you said that, posed that question, I thought of the first and second commandment, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So we truly love other people as ourselves, we're going to help them. And compared to God, we're all on the same plane. We've all sinned. We've all done things. We're all the same. And there can be an easy way. I have a friend of mine that I work with is from India. And he's explained to me some of the caste system, right, where they can be very cordial to other people that are on their same social status. But a lot of times that cordial kindness is not given to people who are in different statuses. And so it's easy to do that. I mean, even in our society, right, we tend to hang around with people that are kind of like us. But like you said, the person in the bar, he needs our love and compassion. I have too. Probably more sometimes. So.
Yeah.
You know, we're all descended to Noah.
Yeah, that's right,
Every one of them.
right,
Just like Esau and Jacob were descendants of Isaac, we are descendants.
right.
So we're brothers.
Do we spend too much time thinking about whether I should be helping somebody? I think we do. Are we going to get stung once in a while? I think we will. You know, we had some friends before that, you know, we used to go down to Indianapolis with once in a while. And not very often, but once in a while. But it was interesting, you know, because around here, I don't know, I don't go in the right, of course, lately, that's not true. So what am I talking about? You know, anyway, before, you know, we used to go down to Indianapolis. Well, other than, at least in Indiana, that was kind of the first place that you could regularly see people standing on the street corner looking for handouts, right? You know, and then the people we go down there with, oh, no, they're just, you know, they don't need nothing. That's the way they are. You know, they're just trying to get a free handout. Well, maybe that's right. Maybe that isn't right, right? But, well, now it's pretty easy around here to see people standing on the street corner looking for money or gas money or whatever that is. And you know, do I pass by most of them most of the time? I do. Should I? Probably not. You know, if nothing else, maybe I should find out what the story is, you know, and see if there are things we can help, you know. I mean, because I think on some of them, the sad thing is that people trying to get something for nothing is increasing more and more every day. But should that really change our response? I mean, God didn't say I have to give to everybody, right? I mean, sometimes if you do have the opportunity, and many times we don't, right? I mean, there's times I'm going someplace, I got to get there, you know, and I was busy doing something. And so I don't have time to stop and check out people, you know. But I think God really wants us to do that at some opportunity, you know, presents itself to be able to see if we can help people like that, you know.
Story, in the 16th chapter of Luke, we have two men described. One was wealthy, the rich man,
Right.
and one was Lazarus, a very poor man, who sat at the rich man's gate and begged for food. Now, of those two men, which one went to paradise and which one went
Yeah, yeah,
And perhaps the one that drove by the other ended up in torment.
right.
And the one that was begging ended up in paradise.
Right.
We got to be real careful how we judge.
Right, right. Yeah, because I think sometimes, I want to move on, I don't want to spend too much time on, but sometimes, you know, is it, you know, for people that are, you know, you want to call it panhandling or begging, whatever you want to call it, you know, that are looking for money on the corner. You know, I mean, I have no doubt that there are times like that stopping and talking to them, they may have need for even understanding how to get assistance. Maybe that's the way they can be helped. You know, we as a church, we did that for a while, right? We supported multiple families. Linda and I participated in that. You know, we bought groceries for them or we bought whatever they needed, and you kind of adopted a family, and we did that. Well, you know, and so there was a little bit of training that went into that because, you know, you can very easily get taken advantage of, not necessarily in a bad way, but sometimes those people really don't understand what they need, right? You know, what they need much more than money is they need to know how to manage money, right? And so, you know, in order to try to provide the best benefit and the most effective benefit to some of these people, you know, we had some training that helped us understand that. You know, that, well, once you get in there, yeah, we need to buy groceries for them and we need to do this and do that, but pay attention because maybe there's things that they need much, much more than that help them with life's, you know, education and needs and help them, you know, be able to take care of themselves someday. You know, so anyway, you know, it's so easy, I think, for us to start ignoring that because it gets more and more you see them on the street corner, you know. More and more they're on the street corner, and some of them I look at and go, "Ooh, I wouldn't stop." You know, but there's a lot of them that aren't, and it doesn't matter what they look like, right?
Sometimes we can look outside the church, but a lot of times I think there's people in the church that need help, but unless you know that person, you won't know what they need.
Right, right,
That's how you have to get to know them. And put yourself
That's right. That's right. That's right. Until you get to know somebody, if they don't express a need that they have or a desire for help, unless you get to know that person, you may never know that. That's right. Good point. Good point. So between one of us and somebody on the outside, say somebody, a non-Christian, who are we supposed to take care of first? Does God tell us? I guess it's not written anywhere. Nobody said anything. Huh? Both are important, right? Both are important for us to take care of. So anyway, a point, regarding that, instead of standing aloof and ignoring things like that. Where I was kind of going last week too with some of that also was, okay, so these are things that we can do, right? That help our brothers. Regardless of how that is. There's other things going on in this world that are attack on us and an attack on Christianity. We kind of alluded to some of that stuff with talking about things going on in the legislature. We didn't describe it that way, but laws, that go against the grain of God. What's our responsibility and things like that? That's standing aloof for us as Christians as well, right? If our local government, whether it's city, state, federal, whatever, are doing laws, or creating laws and things that are not right in terms of what God says, then what should we be doing about that? Should we be writing letters and stuff? I asked for a show of hands last week. How many people have written a letter to their senator or representative or something? My hand went up, Randy's hand went up, and maybe one or two others. That was it. And we had more people in here than that last time. Yeah. And I think that's something that, things that we need to do. Do I think we need to go out there and protest? I don't think that does any good, But I think it does, writing letters, making sure people understand that they know there's... The other thing was, and I don't know, that's kind of a slippery slope, but getting involved in some of these, petitions and questionnaires and stuff that they send out. It amazes me how many times things are justified by the government, local levels, federal level, where, well, this is what the American people want. Bull! I don't know anybody, I know a lot of people that don't want that, so where'd you get that information? Well, we took a poll, So what did they do? They probably did, but they had their people fill out the poll, right? Yeah, and it's like, so I think there's things like that. I mean, it's just like, our vice president, kind of shamed herself the other day, right? What did she say? We can't have voter ID, and this is just a thing to talk about, not necessarily putting you on one side of the fence or the other. But we can't have voter IDs because those rural people don't know how, they can't make a photocopy. They don't have equipment like that. I truly believe that she believes that. I truly do. Have you seen the inside of a combine lately? Huh? You know why them things cost $500,000? Because they got a big old thing connected to a satellite up there, and it's bringing in satellite images, and it tells them exactly how much, corn is being processed, or how much is, whatever it is. They got more in computer technology that farmer is running. And it's not just farmers she was talking about, but, just case in point. And I truly believe some of them are just so out of touch with reality that we need to write letters to. Are they ever going to see them? I don't know. But I think if we never write one, I think God's going to say, you should have done something. So there's things that I think we need to look at. Yeah, Micah.
You talked a lot about being aloof and how violence was being done among their brother Jacob, and they had a responsibility of all the people who knew about. Well, I think about the phrase, the only thing for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. That old phrase. And I was thinking about a conversation I just had with Paige yesterday. We were driving in my truck, and she was telling me the story about how this woman, when she was a young girl, was taking in the Jews during Nazi Germany. And this this one spy came in and was really saying, I'm a Jew, save me, but he didn't know the code word. But because she was compassionate, she chose, okay, we'll help you out. But he was a spy for the Nazis, and it caused her and her family to be arrested. But her and her family were doing the right thing because it was the right thing to do. And that's one of the things that we think about is sometimes we don't do the right thing because we're afraid or prideful like these people were. And when we think about our country or our world, who are the ones who are going to speak about morality? If anyone should know morality better than anyone in the world, it should be Christians. We should be the ones speaking up. And if he's talking about things like violence, have we had conversations with people like that? I know that some of our young people I talked about with the new science about abortion. Like they didn't know about some of this stuff. Are we having some of those conversations with our young people? Are we talking about all the things that we see are the moral decline in our country or our world? Are we just sitting with our friends or with young people and having some of these conversations because they're being taught all this stuff from the world and from school or YouTube or whatever, and they never hear the counter argument or a discussion? You take these kids out for coffee and you have a real conversation. They're like, I never thought of that, or I never heard that. And that's one of the ways we can influence. You know, just using our personal relationships within the church or in our community to really share some of those things. Because they're hearing all these messages that are repeated through the media and school and YouTube and so forth, but they don't hear about all the moral issues and the moral God and the eternal God who cares about humanity more than anyone else. And so, as Christians, we need to rise up and have these conversations and be involved because we can't stand aloof and let the world decline.
Right. Good point. Because, we're talking about things we can do, right? And, and so I was talking about contacting, people that are higher up. And we know that's going to have minimal impact, but nevertheless, I think it needs to be done. But what you said is I think, is one of the paths that we need to pursue. And what do we need to do to be able to do that? One thing is we have to have a relationship, right? Like Irene said. The other is we need to be educated. We need to be educated on some of those topics so that we can have those kind of discussions with our youth or with our peers or anything else because, the point that you made about abortion, all they hear about is the positive things, right? We don't hear about the negative things, the things that go wrong. And that's true of anything. People will use their information to point or to paint a positive picture of things. And so from our perspective, we can help broaden that understanding. So that's an excellent point, yeah. Other thoughts? I think John just went to ring the bell, didn't he? So what else can we do? That's just the first bell.
Another thought that I have is at the end of this prophecy, the very last line says, "In the kingdom of God will be the Lord." That's pretty much parallel in Revelation 15, where it says, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of His Christ, and He will reign forever and ever." That's a theme that runs throughout the Bible. When He says in numerous places, "I will be their God and they will be my people." He wants His people to love Him and to love their neighbor. Those are the two commands that we have, and that's very simple. It's so simple. And He says He wants His kingdom. He's going to have His kingdom, and He's still got the last say in it. Those who don't love Him and don't love their fellow man are going to be left out.
Right. Yeah, good point. Okay, we got 5 minutes left, I think. Yeah.
Talking about who do we help? Do we help people that are clean and nice to look at, or do we help people with a bar that's drunk, or do we help people on the corner that's dirty, smelly? You know, I don't remember where I heard this, but there's a saying there, but for the grace of God go I. That could be us.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, we are here by the grace of God, and we could be on that street corner begging for food.
Right.
Actually be hungry. You don't know.
Right. And, you know, and what is, you know, I think, you know, we know that God isn't going to tempt us or provide trials any more than we can handle, right? He tells us that. We know that. I don't know that we necessarily believe it all the time. But I think that's a greater statement than just that. You know, I think that also applies to opportunities. I think if I finally have the guts to go talk to somebody on the street corner, you know, whether that, regardless, you know, I think he isn't going to give me an opportunity there that's more than I can handle. I think he's going to give me somebody that I can work with, you know, that I could do something about. And then if I can actually help that person, then I think he's going to be able to give me somebody that maybe needs a little bit more help next time, you know. And I'm not just always talking about giving somebody money or things like that, or helping them find a job or whatever it happens to be, whatever their need is. You know, I think it's all of that, right? But it's real easy for us to drive by them, you know, like you say. You know, you talk about the drunks and stuff, and, you know, my grandfather was an alcoholic nearly all his life. My grandmother and my grandfather separated when my mother was just a little girl, right? And I didn't know my grandfather very well. He worked it was probably about 200 miles away from where we lived. And he would come visit us once in a while. You know, he'd come all the way down the street to see us, and he'd take the Greyhound bus and he'd come down there and stuff. He worked in a tanning factory. And so he'd worked in a tanning factory during the day, and he was drunk all of the rest of the time. But every once in a while, every couple of years, he'd sober up long enough to come down and see us. And as long as he was sober, it was okay if he stayed with us, and he did. You know, and so we'd be with Grandpa for a few days, and then he'd up and go back. He'd have to go back to work and stuff. And, you know, and he lived on Skid Row. He lived in an apartment. There was a part of Fargo that we lived in that they had almost a half a city block. All it was really old apartment buildings that were probably this far from getting it condemned. But a guy owned all of that, and he rented all of those places to the drunks in the area so that they would have a place to stay. And so they paid little or nothing for a little one-room place, right? My grandfather lived there for years. He lived across the street from a bar called the Pink Pussycat. So whenever I wanted to go find my grandpa, I went over to the Pink Pussycat and I saw him. You know, so when you talk about smelly people and, you know, and the smell of alcohol and all of that stuff, you know, I didn't grow up in that, but I was involved in that, you know, and I'd go in there. And, you know, and so people see that, and you can have whatever impression you want to have. But I'll tell you what, the very first time, and I was going to college then. Yeah, I think I was in college then. It was the very first time. The very first time I went to find my grandfather. I went to the bar, went to the Pink Pussycat, because I knew that's always where he hung around. Well, all you had to do was talk to any drunk in there. They all knew him. Now, you didn't call him Albert Johnson. His name was Highball. I'm looking for Highball. And nobody knew him. Nobody knew him, you know. It took me over a day to finally get one of them guys to let me see him, you know, or at least to get him out there where I could talk to him and stuff. And because they protected themselves, they protected each other. That was a community like you wouldn't believe. For being a bunch of alcoholics, they really protected one another. You know, different kind of a thing. You know, there's places I've been, I wouldn't trust any of them guys to protect me, but I would have trusted this bunch. You know, and you know, so every time I come down, nobody knew my name, but they knew that was Highball's grandson, right? So once I got down there, then I would go down and see him once in a while. We lived in Fargo after that. After I worked down in Fargo for a while, and then when Linda and I got married, we lived in Fargo till I went back to school and stuff, so I'd go see my grandfather once in a while. you know, and that was just a completely different environment, you know. And did those guys need help? Yeah, they needed help. Were there guys in there preaching to them and talking to them? They absolutely were, you know. But one of the nice things was they were in there looking after their needs as well, you know. They were talking about Jesus to them, and they were talking about this as well, but they were talking, are you okay, you know? Your health okay? How's things going with, you know, what you're doing? Because a lot of them did have jobs. Some of them did. And towards the end, when I really spent time with my grandfather the most, he was retired and he was living off of Social Security. You know, and you think about, well, okay, how do you live off of Social Security? I don't know what his regular pay was, but you know what? A few months before he passed away, he finally took me to his room, because I always met him at the Pink Pussycat. He finally took me to his room, and he gave me a stack of Social Security checks that had never been cashed. You know, and he said, here, you take these home and give them to your mother. And so he signed off on all of them. It was several $1,000s. And why was he doing that? Well, it was going to take care of him. Because it wasn't too much after that, we found out he had cancer. You know, and it wasn't too much after that, he finally passed away. You know, but it was just different. Nicest guy you ever want to meet, if you don't mind meeting an alcoholic. You know? So yeah, you just never know. Everybody has different needs. So anyway, we're out of time here, and I know we want to finish this up. So, you know, the point to all of this was, you know, I think the biggest thing that trips us up today isn't the big things, it's the little things, you know. The aloofness, right? And so think about that, you know, is this, you know, the little armbands, you know, or wristbands that, you know, what would Jesus do? You know, initially when I first saw those, I said, well, those are kind of silly. But you know what? They're not. You know, I know they're not. You know, it's something hanging there, or it's something on your wrist that reminds you all the time, you know. Guys like me, we need something like that on a headband that's around here that keeps tapping you in the nose. But anyway, thank you for your attendance, and thank you for your comments and thoughts. Appreciate it. Next week, like I said, Jason's going to be teaching. I don't know what he's going to teach, but it'll be in Minor Prophets. Okay? So who has... And, oh, there he comes. Okay, thank you.
Shirley said Phil Ward's home now, which is good news. I know he was just in the hospital. As far as announcements, I don't have any else. I only have one thing, I guess, that is new. I'll just go ahead and read it. It says, please be aware that we're cleaning, filling cracks, resealing, and restriping the parking lot. And Corey Wentz, Kerry Klein, and Larry DeWitt are all working on this activity. Says, we are doing this to preserve the parking lot. So the older part is the part, obviously, that's being worked on. But it says over the next couple of weeks, there may be cones or roped off areas that are being worked on. So the request is that be aware of that, kind of look out for them, and try to avoid those areas. And also, Corey, Kerry, and Larry says, I guess they could use some help at some point. I think, is that going to be in a couple of weeks, Corey? Some time frame like that? I think it needs help right away. Right away, okay. So if you're willing to help out in any capacity, see Corey. And I was going to add to that, if you go out in the parking lot and you see a spot that it doesn't quite look right, and you say something to Corey, that kind of automatically puts you on the maintenance crew. So be careful of complaining, and the same goes for stripes. When Larry does the striping, if you don't like it, we'll be glad to let you do it. So I think it's going to look pretty good, though. There's a lot of work being put in on that, and it's going to take some time. So I know they can appreciate the help. Are there any other, any new announcements?
How's Brett? I know Brett's been having trouble with his hip.
Well, is there an update on Brett McNeil?
He went to the doctor and he got x-rays taken, and the doctor is still looking at that. He was doing some exercises and taking a leave, and he was doing better.
Okay.
So he felt good enough that he left this morning to go to Kansas City.
Okay, so he is doing better, well enough that he's going to Kansas City to visit his uncle? Okay, all right. Okay, anything else? Kevin, you're up.
Let's go to God in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for this evening that we've had to study your word, to learn from the mistakes made in the past, to know that all of our brothers, that we need to watch out for them, to show true love. We ask, Lord, that you be with some of the members of our congregation who are still ill. We want to thank you for the improvement that Phil and Brett have had, that they're able to get back home and to be able to make some trips. We ask that you continue to bless them and strengthen them. We ask all of this in your Son's name. Amen.
Yeah.